Tribute to a dead friend. Now that Tana is dead, I suppose it is not too treacherous of me to write about him. He was only a year older than I. He died in Paris in his 22nd year, and Praveen wrote to me from London and told me about it. I will get more details from Praveen when he returns to India next month. Just now, I only know that Tana is dead. It is supposed to be in very bad taste to discuss a person behind his back, and to discuss a dead person is most unfair, for he cannot even retaliate. But Tanner had this very weakness of criticizing absent people, and it cannot hurt him now if I do a little to expose his colossal ego. Tanner was a fraud, all right, but no one knew it. He had beautiful round eyes, a flashing smile, and a sweet voice, and everyone said he was a charming person. He was certainly charming, but I have found that charming people are seldom sincere. I think I was the only person who came anywhere near to being his friend, for he had cultivated a special loneliness of his own, and it was difficult to intrude on it. I met him in London in the summer of 54. I was trying to become a writer while I worked part time at a number of different jobs. I had been 2 years in London and was longing for the hills and rivers of India. Tana was Vietnamese, his family was well to do, and though the communists had taken their home town of Hanoi, most of the family was in France, well established in the restaurant business. Tana did not suffer from the same financial distress as other students whose homes were in northern Vietnam. He wasn't studying anything in particular but practiced assiduously on the piano, though the only thing he could play fairly well was Chopin's Funeral March. My friend Praveen, a happy go lucky, very friendly Gujarati boy, introduced me to Tana. Praveen, like a good Indian, thought all Asians were superior people, but he didn't know Tana well enough to know that Tana didn't like being an Asian. At first, Tana was glad to meet me. He said he had for a long time been wanting to make friends with an Englishman, a real Englishman, not one who was a Pole, a Cockney, or a Jew. He was most anxious to improve his English and talk like Mr. Glendinning of the BBC. Praveen, knowing that I had been born and bred in India, that my parents had been born and bred in India, suppressed his laughter with some difficulty. But Tana was soon disillusioned. My accent was anything but English. It was a pronounced Chichi accent. You speak like an Indian, exclaimed Tana, horrified. Are you an Indian? He is Welsh, said Praveen with a wink. Tana was slightly mollified. Being Welsh was the next best thing to being English. Only he disapproved of the Welsh for speaking with an Indian accent. Later, when Praveen had gone and I was sitting in Tana's room drinking Chinese tea, he confided in me that he disliked Indians. Isn't Praveen your friend? I asked. I don't trust him, he said. I have to be friendly, but I don't trust him at all. I don't trust any Indians. What's wrong with them? They are too inquisitive, complained Tana. No sooner have you met one of them that he is asking you who your father is and what your job is and how much money you have in the bank. I laughed and tried to explain that in India, inquisitiveness is a sign of a desire for friendship, and that he should feel flattered when asked such personal questions. I protested that I was an Indian myself, and he said if that was so, he wouldn't trust me either. But he seemed to like me and often invited me to his rooms. He could make some wonderful Chinese and French dishes. When we had eaten, he would sit down at his second hand piano and play Chopin. He always complained that I didn't listen properly. He complained of my untidiness and my unwarranted self confidence. It was true that I appeared most confident when I was not very sure of myself. I boasted of an intimate knowledge of London's geography, but I was an expert at losing my way and then blaming it on someone else. You are a useless person, said Tanner. While with chopsticks I stuffed my mouth with delicious pork and fried rice. You cannot find your way anywhere. You cannot speak English properly. You do not know any people except Indians. How are you going to be a writer? If I am as bad as all that, I said, why do you remain my friend? I want to study your stupidity, he said. That was why he never made any real friends. He loved to work out your faults and examine your imperfections. There was no such thing as a real friend, he said. He had looked everywhere, but he could not find the perfect friend. What is your idea of a perfect friend? I asked him. Does he have to speak perfect English? But sarcasm was only wasted on Tanner. He admitted that perfect English was one of the requisites of a perfect friend. Sometimes, in moments of deep gloom, he would tell me that he did not have long to live. There is a pain in my chest, he complained. There is something ticking there all the time. Can you hear it? He would bare his bony chest for me, and I would put my ear to the offending spot. But I could never hear any ticking. Visit the hospital, I advised. They will give you an x ray and a proper checkup. I have had x rays, he lied. They never show anything. Then he would talk of killing himself. This was his theme song. He had no friends. He was a failure as a musician. There was no other career open to him. He hadn't seen his family for 5 years and he couldn't go back to Indochina because of the communists. He magnified his own troubles and minimized other people's troubles. When I was in hospital with an old acquaintance, amoebic dysentery, Praveen came to see me every day. Tana, who was not very busy, came only once and never again. He said the hospital ward depressed him. You need a holiday, I told him when I was out of hospital. Why don't you join the students' union and work on a farm for a week or two? That should toughen you up. To my surprise, the idea appealed to him and he got ready for the trip. Suddenly, he became suffused with a goodwill towards all mankind. As evidence of his trust in me, he gave me the key of his room to keep, though he would have been secretly delighted if I had stolen his piano and chopsticks, giving him the excuse to say, never trust an Indian or an Anglo Indian, and introduced me to a girl called Wu Fong, a small, very pretty Annamite girl who was studying at the Polytechnic. Miss Wu, Tanner told me, had to leave her lodgings next week and would I find somewhere else for her to stay. I was an experienced hand at finding bed sitting rooms, having changed my own about 5 times in 6 months. That sweet nomadic London life. As I found Miss Wu very attractive, I told her I would get her a room, one not far from my own, in case she needed any further assistance. Later, in confidence, Tana asked me not to be too friendly with Wu Fong as she was not to be trusted. But as soon as he left for the farm, I went round to see Wu in her new lodgings, which were one tube station away from my own. She seemed glad to see me, and as she too could make French and Chinese dishes, I accepted her invitation to lunch. We had chicken noodles, soya sauce, and fried rice. I did the washing up. Wu said, do you play cards, Ruskin? She had a sweet, gentle voice that brought out all the gallantry in a man. I began to feel protective and hovered about her like a devoted cocker spaniel. I'm not much of a card player, I said. Never mind, I will tell your fortune with them. She made me shuffle the cards, then scattered them about on the bed in different patterns. I would be very rich, she said. I would travel a lot and I would reach the age of 40. I told her I was comforted to know it. The month was June and Hampstead Heath was only 10 minutes' walk from the house. Boys flew kites from the hill and little painted boats scurried about on the ponds. We sat down on the grass on the slope of the hill and I held Wu's hand. For 3 days I ate with Wu and we told each other our fortunes and lay on the grass on Hampstead Heath, and on the fourth day I said, Wu, I would like to marry you. I will think about it, she said. Tana came back on the sixth day and said, You know, Ruskin, I have been doing some thinking and Wu is not such a bad girl after all. I will ask her to marry me. That is what I need, a wife. Why didn't you think of it before? I said. When will you ask her? Tonight, he said. I will come to see you afterwards and tell you if I have been successful. I shrugged my shoulders resignedly and waited. Tanner left me at 6 in the evening and I waited for him till 10 o'clock, all the time feeling a little sorry for him, more disillusionment for Tanner. Poor Tanner. He came in at 10 o'clock, his face beaming. He slapped me on the back and said I was his best friend. Did you ask her? I said. Yes. She said she would think about it. That is the same as yes. It isn't, I said, unfortunately for both of us. She told me the same thing. Tana looked at me as though I had just stabbed him in the back. Etruscan was what his expression said. We took a taxi and sped across to Wu's room. The uncertain nature of her replies was too much for both of us. Without a definite answer, neither of us would have been able to sleep that night. Wu was not at home. The landlady met us at the door and told us that Wu had gone to the theatre with an Indian gentleman. Tana gave me a long, contemptuous look. Never trust an Indian, he said. Never trust a woman, I replied. At 12 o'clock, I woke Praveen. Whenever I could not sleep, I went to Praveen. He knew the remedy for all ailments. As on previous occasions, he went to the cupboard and produced a bottle of cognac. We got drunk. He was 17 and I was 19, and we were both quite decadent. 3 weeks later, I returned to India. Tana went to Paris to help in his sister's restaurant. I did not hear of Wu Fong again. And now, a year later, there is the letter from Praveen. All he can tell me is that Tana died of some unknown disease. I wonder if it had anything to do with the ticking in his chest or with his vague threats of suicide. I doubt if I will ever know, and I will never know how much I hated Tanner and how much I loved him, or if there was any difference between hating and loving him.